Ah ouais. On est en ligne, Martin? Ah, Martin, pardon. Là, maintenant? On est en ligne. Ok, we are online. Donc, messieurs, dames, avant de commencer, on attend juste une petite minute. Nous aurons une toute petite minute de retard. On attend la Jourdi qui traduit en anglais, qui est allée récupérer son ordinateur. So we will have 1 minute or 2 of delay. We are just waiting for Jourdi for the English translation. Thank you. She's running from the park side.
Janjo Barado Dani Jabzo Je Daje Jens Pesanam Je Dola Bench Sanje Drobara Jo Sanje Jodan Zaje Janam La Janjo Barado Dani Jabzo Je Daje Jens Ibe zanam je dola benjer zanje robara jo zanje jodan zaje jana janjo barado dani jabzo je dage jenzo je be zanam dola benjer zanje robara jo zemjan damje devada Kebe jodan dembara joji donga dan donga jeju dan dewa joji donga mebe dewa damba dan minde wara joji nyerin jat tandebe danyon jambola neba jura je badan zabe lama rinpo dagi jebora bede denchol Gone Jezon, Gozon do Jeng do Zarato, Zara, Jamden de Jambe Yan la Jadze, Lo Ganji, Lo de Dini, Jinjel, Ninda, Namda la Ze, Jinye Dungun, Zijin, Zijir, Niji, Dogale Bamzi. Ganda zibe zara mare manda dongara jizewe dozo gana buje darze yana dojo yandenzo dodai jadro nyaman hilon lege chadro dozeji mare manza donga nyugo jinye chazera denam Dene daijin zaiju darze yanden luzo jerze dogo Chura chura juni jande dare munzere jambe yan la du Tseden jeji jera beze Dare demo mba labzene Kadan denje jolon do bai Roger Bobena Azadozo.
Hello, everyone. Hello to everyone who's following online. So just to go over what we've seen so far, we covered all of the preliminary part. In our last session in October, we covered the presentation of the title of the text, and then we looked at the expression of the homage and promise of composition from Vasubandhu. Then we looked at the explanation of the meaning of the title of the treatise by looking at the meaning of the terms Abhidharma and Kosha. That's what we went over in October. And now, during our session here, we're on the third day. What we've covered so far is the presentation of the purpose of the treatise, and then we started the presentation of the contents of the treatise. What we saw is that the theme of this treatise, this text particularly treats or covers phenomena associated with and dissociated from factors for descent. And having covered that, we went into the explanations on phenomena associated with factors for descent. We saw that phenomena associated with factors for descent is all conditioned phenomena with the exception of the truth of the path. So once we looked at that, which is a very, very general view, then we saw that phenomena dissociated from factors for descent are the truth of the path and the three unconditioned phenomena. And when we looked at phenomena associated with factors for descent, we saw that these phenomena are associated with factors for descent because based on them, factors for descent, afflictive obscurations, deploy or are susceptible to deploying. Phenomena dissociated from factors for descent are phenomena based on which afflictive obscurations are not susceptible to developing. Then we saw a presentation slightly more detailed concerning these three unconditioned phenomena, which is part of the classification of phenomena dissociated from factors for descent. We covered space with the definition of space. We looked at cessation by way of examination and cessation without the means of examination. We won't go back into it here, but it's good to go back to this, to go back over what we looked at. And once we concluded these points, then we had concluded the preliminary part of the text. Following this preliminary part of the text, we began the first chapter, which is called the presentation of the Dhatus. This first chapter begins with a point that defines the conditioned. And we saw that in this point there are 4 parts. We gave the definition of the conditioned or conditioned phenomena. We saw that what is conditioned is what is born from causes and conditions. And we saw that The conditioned is precisely the five aggregates: the aggregate of matter, the aggregate of sensation, the aggregate of distinction, the aggregate of conditioning phenomena, and the aggregate of consciousness. And following this, we saw different names, different terms that are attributed to conditioned phenomena. These terms are synonyms. We looked at 4 terms attributed to conditioned phenomena, and then we covered 7 terms or synonyms which are used for conditioned phenomena associated with factors for descent in particular. Meaning that these 7 names are not applicable to unconditioned phenomena or the truth of the path, because these are dissociated from factors for descent. So everything's all right. Doing a little recap here. And so having covered this, we concluded the definition of conditioned. And so now we begin a second point, which is the definition of the aggregates, dhatus, and ayatanas. This is a fairly extensive, detailed point. What we'll see is that, contrary to what many of you have studied in the entry to the path of the state of a pandita, where there is one chapter for the aggregates, one chapter for the ayatanas, and a third for the dhatus. Here, the way that these topics are presented in the Abhidharmakosha, we find the 3 together. Aggregates, dhatus, and ayatanas are presented at the same time. We'll start by looking at the nature of the aggregates, dhatus, and ayatanas, by beginning with the material aggregates, dhatus, and ayatanas. And so first off, concerning these material aggregates, dhatus, and ayatanas, there is a concise presentation. And then, of course, a detailed explanation follows. This brings us to stanza 9, lines 1 and 2. Before reading the stanza, I'll just give the definition of an aggregate. An aggregate is a collection of numerous things. When we talk about the aggregate of matter, we're talking about a collection of numerous types of matter. Now we'll read the first 2 lines of stanza 9 in Vasubandhu's text. Matter, semicolon, colon. Matter, the 5 governing faculties, the 5 objects, and non-indicative matter. So we'll look at these 3 things, the 5 governing faculties, the 5 objects, and non-indicative matter. And we will cover this once we have looked at the definition of matter. The definition of matter, there are 3. In any case, Khelzang Puntso gave us 3 different definitions of matter. A first definition: matter is what is susceptible to being destroyed or damaged. That's the first definition. Then there's a second definition, which says that matter is what has the capacity to obstruct something else. Or also, it is what is touchable. It's another way of saying that. What has the capacity to obstruct is then touchable. That was the second definition. And the third definition is that in the location where there is matter, there cannot be another matter present. There cannot be two matters, types of matter, in the same location. And Khelzang Puntso said that the third definition is the best. So just to explain this third definition a bit, Khelzang Puntso said to us, matter is damageable. It can be damaged. What does this mean? It means that one matter cannot be in the same location as another matter. If two matters touch, they damage each other. There's some kind of harm. So in the location of one matter, another matter cannot abide. They can touch, they can collide and damage each other, but they can't be in the same place. They can't superpose onto each other in the same location. He gave an example to illustrate this. It's like making torma. If you're not familiar with torma, they are offerings that we make by making a kind of cake, and the cakes have different shapes, and they're offered to the yidams, protectors, the three jewels. And so when we make these tormas, we take some dough. We make dough, and we take a piece of dough, and then we take a bit more dough. We have two pieces of dough, and we'll mix them together. And this ball of dough, then we shape it, and it's a torma. And once we have put the two balls of dough together to make the torma, well, we have a bigger ball of dough. This means that one ball of dough hasn't melted into the other ball of dough. They have agglomerated together. This is an example that illustrates the fact that two matters cannot be in the same location. If we take a ball of dough in the right hand and a ball of dough in the left hand and we mix them together, then the ball of dough is bigger. There is an agglomeration of matter. We might think that one ball melts into the other ball, but this is not the case. If we look in detail, in terms of the atoms, they are not in the same location. They touch, but they're not in the same place. So if we look with this example of the dough and the agglomeration of particles, the particles that make up this agglomeration each remain in their own location. And this, according to Khelzang Puntso, is the best definition of matter. The fact that two matters cannot be found in the same location. So this is the meaning of matter, or aggregate of matter. And here, a note here for those who are habituated to studying the Kejuk, the entry to the state of a Pandita, the term that's used for this aggregate is the aggregate of form. There are discussions among the translators, which aren't really up to me. I'm not a translator. But in the Abhidharmakosha, Dhagpo began this translation when we started studying in 2015, when we started receiving this text. We used the term matter, and the translator maintains that in the context of the Abhidharmakosha, that matter is the appropriate term here. In Tibetan, the term is zuk, which is the same term that is translated as form in the Kejuk, but in the context of the Abhidharmakosha, we will use the term matter. So that was the definition of matter. And now we will come to the classification of matter. It's very simple. It's what is said in the root text. There are the 5 sense faculties, the 5 sense objects, and non-indicative matter. And in relation to this classification of matter, all of the schools of thought accept that the 5 sense faculties and the 5 sense objects are matter. No one questions that. However, there is discussion concerning the 11th matter. Not everyone accepts that non-indicative matter makes up an 11th matter, but this is really the point of view of the Vaibhashika. There is this 11th matter, which is non-indicative matter, and we'll talk about it a lot in the Abhidharmakosha, notably in the 4th chapter. We'll talk about it a bit later on in this presentation of the 11th matter here, but it's a fairly succinct explanation, and it will come back in great detail in the 4th chapter. So this was the concise presentation of the material aggregates, ayatanas, and dhatus. This will be clearer later on or tomorrow. Yeah, it'll get clearer concerning why we talk about material aggregates, dhatus, and ayatanas. Just for a teaser, it's the same thing. When we talk about matter, the aggregates of matter, the dhatus of matter, material ayatanas, it's the same things. It's the same phenomena. We'll talk about this more. It might seem a bit long, but I'll keep going with the next part. I won't hand things over to Alexandra yet. The way that we planned splitting up the information kind of shifted partway through, and so now I have a very long part, but don't worry, she'll come back to you later. And Alexandra says, I'm smiling and listening. So next we come, following the concise presentation, we come to the detailed explanation, where we will look at the 5 governing faculties, the 5 objects, and non-indicative matter. We'll begin with the 5 governing faculties. This corresponds to what is said in stanza 9, lines 3 and 4, which reads, supports of the consciousness associated with them. The eye and the other faculties are subtle, transparent matter. The 5 faculties apprehend the 5 sense objects. The 5 faculties are eye governing faculty, ear governing faculty, nose governing faculty, tongue governing faculty, and body governing faculty. Those are the 5 faculties. Now I will give you the definition. Sense faculty is an unshared master condition that produces its own result. In other words, a moment of the consciousness for which it is the support. A sense faculty is an unshared master condition that produces its own result. In other words, a moment of consciousness for which it is the support. And we'll explain this definition, and particularly the term unshared master condition. In order to explain this term, we will consider eye faculty. So everything that I will explain now applies to the 5 faculties, the 5 sense faculties. What is meant by unshared master condition? There are 2 explanations that will be given. We begin with the first one. In this process of consciousness, there is what is called the condition of the object. In the process of consciousness, we find the condition of the object. The condition of the object is all of the objects that consciousness will focus on. If we consider eye faculty, then this will concern all visual objects. In the process of visual consciousness, there will be the condition of the object, and the condition of the object will be a visual object. Consciousness will focus on this visual object, which can be, for example, a vase, a pillar, a color, a shape, etc. There are an enormous amount of objects of focus. On the other hand, concerning the master condition, there is only one, the sense faculty. In order for a moment of visual consciousness to arise, there can be a whole number of different objects that can possibly come into play, but the master condition can only be eye faculty. The fact that the master condition is something unique, whereas objects of focus are numerous, is the first reason why we say that it is unshared. Is everything okay? Okay, now we will have the second explanation concerning why the faculty is called the unshared master condition. Let's consider this telephone. This telephone is a shared condition. Why? Because it is a condition that produces a moment of consciousness, a visual consciousness for all of us, for me, for you. However, my visual faculty is a condition that will produce a moment of visual consciousness of the telephone only for me. So this is another reason why the faculty is an unshared condition. Everything okay? So to go into a bit more explanation, in order for a moment of visual consciousness to arise or be born, 3 conditions are necessary. First, the condition of the object, an outer object. That's the first condition of the object. The second condition is called the immediately preceding condition. That's an inner condition. We'll talk about it more. We'll explain it in detail, the second condition. And then there is the primary or master condition, which is the faculty. In the case of our example, I governing faculty. In order for a moment of visual consciousness to arise, these 3 conditions are necessary: a visual object, the immediately preceding condition, and the faculty, the master condition. If these 3 conditions come together, then a moment of visual consciousness appears. And out of these 3 conditions that allow for the appearance of a visual consciousness, the one that is exclusive, that is unshared, concerning the birth of visual consciousness, it is the I governing faculty. It is the master or primary condition. It is the single one that is unshared. Why isn't the condition of the object not an exclusive condition for the birth of visual consciousness? As we just saw, concerning a visual object, again with the example of the telephone, it can give rise to my visual consciousness. It can also give rise to visual consciousness for all of you. It's not only my own visual consciousness that can arise based on the condition of the object. This is why the condition of the object cannot be said to be unshared. Next, we'll talk about the immediately preceding condition. This is also a condition that is said to be shared. It's not a condition that is exclusive to birth or arising of a moment of visual consciousness, because based on this immediately preceding condition, visual consciousness does not necessarily appear. In order to understand this, we need to understand what we talk about when we talk about the immediately preceding condition. We are talking about a mental event called mental engagement. This mental engagement is associated with mental consciousness. This consciousness, mental consciousness, associated with mental engagement can give rise to visual consciousness, but also auditory consciousness, olfactive consciousness, etc. This mental event, which is mental engagement, can give rise to all of the five sense consciousnesses, or any of the five sense consciousnesses. And this is this condition, the immediately preceding condition, is not an unshared condition. This mental condition can give rise to all of the consciousnesses, mental and sense consciousnesses. Additionally, then we have the third condition, I governing faculty. This is the master condition, which only brings about visual consciousness and only for the person it relates to. To say it maybe in a simpler way, I'm looking at this telephone, you're looking at this telephone. This telephone is the condition of the object of my visual consciousness and your visual consciousness, all of your visual consciousness. So we cannot say that it is an unshared condition because it is shared by all of our moments of visual consciousness. The immediately preceding condition is mental consciousness that precedes the moment of visual consciousness. This moment of consciousness that precedes visual consciousness can also give rise to any other type of consciousness, auditory, olfactive, etc. Likewise, it is therefore shared, it is not unshared. However, my visual faculty is the only one that is unshared. It is relative only to the moment of visual consciousness that I experience. That is the explanation concerning unshared master condition. If it seems a bit complicated, once again, don't worry. It's natural. It always takes a little time. You have to come back to it, think about it. Also, maybe the way I'm presenting it isn't that skillful, but in any case, I mean, I gave you the information that we received. The information is good. Just come back to it, and it will come together in time. So that was the explanation for unshared master condition. Now we come back to the root text, stanza 9, lines 3 and 4. Supports of the consciousness associated with them. The eye and the other faculties are subtle, transparent matter. We'll look at the first of these two lines now. Supports of the consciousness associated with them. This explains that each of the faculties is the support of the consciousness that it is associated with. Meaning, eye governing faculty is the support for visual consciousness that apprehends visible matter. Ear governing faculty is the support for the auditory consciousness that apprehends sounds. Nose governing faculty is the support for olfactive consciousness that apprehends smells. Olfactory. Tongue governing faculty is the support of, gustative consciousness, gustatory consciousness that apprehends tastes. And body governing faculty is the support for tactile consciousness that apprehends either tactile phenomena or tangibilities. So that was the third line of stanza 9. Then the fourth line reads, the eye and the other faculties are subtle, transparent matter. Sense faculty is inner matter that is subtle and transparent. This means that it is not perceptible by ordinary beings. It is matter that relates to the realm of experience of the wisdom of a noble being. Khelzang Puntso even said, only the wisdom of a Buddha can see this matter. It's an extremely subtle, transparent matter. And eye governing faculty resembles a cumin flower or a sesame flower or a flax flower, something striped and concentric. It is inner matter. It's inside, we can't see it. The faculty, eye faculty, for example, is not the eyeball. It is a very subtle, transparent inner matter. This eye faculty resembles a cumin flower that is concentrically striped. Ear faculty is like the bud of, it's spiral shaped, and it looks like a birch bud, a birch catkin. Nose governing faculty resembles two copper needles that are next to each other, really, or close together and connected. And why did the Buddha say copper needles instead of metal or gold? Apparently because they're reddish in color. Tongue governing faculty involves divergent opinions, apparently, but Khelzang Puntso shared with us the way that Professor Sempa Dorje explained this. According to Professor Sempa Dorje, this tongue faculty resembles the moon on the first day of its phase, meaning a very slender crescent. And apparently this slender crescent is found at the tip of the tongue. There are others who say that tongue faculty resembles a half moon, so something with a much greater surface, in fact. But Khelzang Puntso said that if we put chocolate in the middle of our tongue, we won't taste it. We won't really be able to taste it easily, whereas if we put it on the tip of our tongue, then we'll be able to perceive the flavor quickly and easily. So that was tongue governing faculty. Then there is body governing faculty, which is like the soft skin of a bird, the silkiest skin you can think of, or the silkiest fluff that you can imagine. This is what this faculty is like. This concludes the presentation of the 5 governing faculties, and I'll let Alexandra continue. We'll continue with the 5 objects. Perhaps we'll take a short meditative break beforehand. We saw that matter is the 5 governing faculties, the 5 objects, and non-indicative matter. So now we will continue with the 5 objects. A quick aside before we go into this part. Sylvain just presented the 3 conditions for a moment of visual consciousness to arise or be born. We saw that there is the condition of the object, the immediately preceding condition, and the master or primary condition, which is the faculty. And now that we have covered this, I'd like to just make a quick point. In the beginning of the course, Sylvain gave a nice introduction saying that your students, we're students, we are applying the process of study. It doesn't mean we're not serious. We do our best to be serious, but yesterday there was a question. I think Andreas asked something concerning cessation without the means of examination and the crow that flew away. And this cessation is obtained on the basis of incomplete coming together of the conditions. And during our exchange concerning this question, at the at this point, when we're having these exchanges, these discussions, it's a bit tricky for us because, as we said, we're not experts. And so I was trying to explain this concerning the fact that the condition of the object is missing. The crow was not there, I'm pretty sure about that. But when the crow was still there, I said that the condition of the faculty was not there, and in terms of the moment of visual consciousness, indeed the faculty is not present, but concerning the individual, the faculty is indeed present. So of course, depending on how we look at it, it's very delicate, and it can lead to errors. This part of the question and answers is really it's delicate, it's tricky, it can be a moment when we discuss and exchange. So I just want to bring your attention to the fact that it's important to be aware of this concerning these moments of discussion, the question and answers. Please be aware of that, particularly concerning the discussion yesterday. And I just wanted to say that because we try to be precise, but sometimes it's not that easy, so I apologize. And in any case, the information concerning the 3 conditions that was just given here is correct and reliable. So that being said, now we will look at the 5 objects, the 5 sense objects. There are 5 objects that are apprehended by different senses. We will talk about the domain of the visible that is apprehended by eyes, or more specifically, eye faculty. We will present sounds that are apprehended by ear faculty. Smells apprehended by nose faculty. Taste apprehended by tongue faculty. And the tangible or tactile, which is apprehended by body faculty. We'll begin with visible phenomena. Though this is the beginning of stanza 10, where we see that visible matter is 2-fold or 20-fold, or indeed 20-fold. And then we will give details on these 2 categorizations, 2-fold and 20-fold. First, we'll give a definition. What we call ayatana of the visible is all phenomena perceived by the eyes. Concerning the classification, this ayatana of the visible can be divided into 2. Shapes and colors. This is the 2-fold classification. And just as here we're using the term shape. We may also be used to the term contour. Here we have shapes and colors. And as part of this kind of introduction, Khelzang Puntso reminded us one of the points that we covered in the established conclusions of the Vaibhashika school. From the point of view of the Vaibhashika, it is not the consciousness that sees. It is not the consciousness that sees. It is the faculty, eye faculty, that sees. We already looked at that, and we'll come back to it in this chapter. So here, the faculty sees two things. It can perceive shapes and colors. Shapes and colors manifest in the eye faculty, or for the eye faculty. Ooh, tricky. And in the Abhidharmakosha, if we wish to go into greater detail, we can see that shapes are classified into 8 types of shapes. Long shapes, short shapes, square shapes, round shapes, high shapes, low shapes, regular or even shapes, and irregular or uneven shapes. Okay. The first pair is high and low shapes. Here, the explanation that Khelzang Puntso gave is that what we understand concerning high shapes is shapes that are above the level of our eye line, and low shapes are shapes that are below the level of our eye line. We have to look down to see them. For long and short shapes, and explaining this, Khelzang Puntso said that these concepts are subjective, or perhaps relative is a better way to say it. We will determine something that is long or something that is short in relation to something else, in relation to a reference point. Khelzang Puntso said, for example, in France, I'm very short, but when I'm at the Shedra in Kalimpong, I'm about average height. So that's a reference point depending on whether we classify something as being long or short, for example. In our study group, we then also wondered if high and low are also something that rely on a reference point. It seems so, but it was a discussion that we had. So concerning round shapes and square shapes, there's nothing more to say. For even and uneven shapes, the example given is that uneven shapes are like mountains, and even shapes are like when it's completely flat. Another example is uneven is like the road in Kalimpong, and an even shape is the roads in France. The highway, anyway. Next we come to colors. We can also subdivide colors into primary colors and secondary colors. There are 4 primary colors. According to the Vaibhashika tradition, the 4 primary colors are blue, yellow, white, and red. These are the primary colors, or we can also call them the root colors, because based on these colors, when we mix them, we can obtain many other colors, like black, if we mix them all, or orange, if we mix red and yellow, green, if we mix blue and yellow. There's an interesting property which allows us to develop an interesting property concerning how to determine a root color, which is that no matter how much we mix the colors, we will never be able to create the primary colors. We can never reach one of the original primary colors by mixing them. So that's concerning primary colors, concerning secondary colors. First thing to know is that there is an uncountable number, all of the colors that come from these mixes. However, here in the text, in the teaching of the Abhidharmakosha, there are 8 that are listed, and we'll see why. These 8 are cloud color, smoke color, dust color, mist color, shadow color, sunlight color, brightness color, and darkness color. So before we get into the explanations of why these colors, there's a little note about cloud color. When we say that cloud color is a secondary color, it's necessary to be aware that not all cloud colors are secondary colors, because white, yellow, red, these are primary colors, and we can find clouds that are white, yellow, and red when there's a nice sunset or a nice sunrise. Clouds can be yellow or red, but all of the other colors of clouds are secondary colors. When the clouds are black for a storm or orange, these are secondary colors. So cloud color as a secondary color concerns all colors other than the primary colors are secondary colors. I remember the day that we received this teaching, I walked out of the institute and looked at the clouds, and they weren't the same as before. Okay, so that was the point, the specific point about the clouds. Then there is an explanation concerning this classification into 8 secondary colors. In fact, there is an immeasurable number of secondary colors, but here we've only listed 8. And there is a reason why we did this. This came later, but I'll read it now. All the other colors, when we see them, green for example, we see green and we know it's a color. But when we see cloud color, we can more easily have doubts. Here we're taking the example of the cloud, but this applies to all 8. When we're in a plane, we can see the clouds. When we're in the clouds, we don't really see the clouds anymore. When we see smoke from far away, we see smoke, but when we're in the smoke, we don't really see the smoke. And we can really wonder if these colors exist. And this is why these particular phenomena were listed in the list of secondary colors, because this clarifies that when there are clouds, smoke, mist, then this is indeed part of visible objects. They are part of the secondary colors. So for some secondary colors, there are no doubts, so they're not listed. We know these are the colors that come from mixing the primary colors. But because there can be doubts concerning the existence of these 8, they are stated as secondary colors. So, this concerns the fact that the visible is twofold, or indeed 20-fold. When we say that the visible is twofold, this refers to color and shape. And when we say that the visible is 20-fold, then we can divide into 4 primary colors, 8 secondary colors, and 8 shapes. That was the list that we saw. Twofold is color and shape. The visible is twofold. It can be color or form or shape. Or the visible is 20-fold, and to find that those 20, we can add up the 4 primary colors, the 8 secondary colors, and that makes 12, and the 8 shapes. That makes 20. So that is the explanation of that line. Yesterday, when I was rereading this, I thought to myself, oh yeah, here we go again with all these lists. Of course, there can be a lot of questions because this isn't the way that we're habituated to look at things as, 20th century Westerners. I thought Rinpoche's reminder was very welcome, that we're acquiring information. We're in a learning phase. And it just reminded me that it's important to keep in mind the purpose of this work and to remind this with our practice, because just these lists, they might seem dry or, as Rinpoche said this morning, boring, but in this perspective with combination of practice, it's really an essential phase where we just acquire this information and then we see how it develops for us. Let's take a few moments to do nothing, to relax, and then we'll continue with the next point. So we have looked at the presentation of visible phenomena. To continue this presentation of the aggregate of matter, and particularly the 5 objects, we will continue with sounds. Stanza 10, line 2, the second line reads, "Sound possesses 8 aspects. First, the definition. The ayatana of sound is the domain apprehended by auditory consciousness. That's the definition of sound. After the definition, we'll look at the classification. As we saw in the root text, sound possesses 8 aspects. We'll look at these 8 aspects, and we'll see that sound can be divided into 8 aspects. Khelzang Puntso said to us, sound can be divided into 8 aspects. Nevertheless, there are 4 primary or main categories. Sounds produced by elements invested with sensations. And in this category of sounds, there are 2 subcategories. Sounds produced by elements invested with sensations that are addressed to beings, and sounds produced by elements invested with sensations that are not addressed to beings. We'll look at we'll cover what elements invested with sensations are. That was the first 2 categories. Sounds produced by elements invested with sensations that are addressed to beings and that are not addressed to beings. Then there are sounds produced by elements non-invested with sensations, with 2 subcategories. Same thing. Sounds produced by elements non-invested with sensations that are addressed to beings, and sounds produced by elements not invested with sensations that are not addressed to beings. Those are the 4 primary categories of sounds. And then concerning 8, we'll get to that in a moment. First, some other explanations. The explanations concerning elements invested with sensations. These are material elements invested by mind stream, by mind. For example, voice is the sound produced by the throat, the vocal cords, and the throat as well as the vocal cords are made up of matter. And this matter is invested with consciousness or mind stream because in the sense that this matter can be subject to sensations. If I catch the flu or if I have a frog in my throat, not a real frog, but I'll feel sensations in my throat. My vocal cords can be painful. So voice is a sound that's produced by elements invested with sensations. Another example is the sound of fingers snapping. This sound is the sound produced by fingers snapping, and the fingers are invested by consciousness, mind stream, a mind, meaning in the sense that I can feel something in my fingers. If I'm petting my cat, I'll feel that the cat I'll feel a soft, pleasant sensation. If I poke my finger, I'll feel a painful sensation. So fingers snapping or voice are sounds produced by material elements invested by sensations. On the other hand, elements not invested with sensations are sounds produced, for instance, by the wind or a bell. A bell and the wind are elements that are not invested with sensation. The bell cannot experience sensation, nor the wind, neither have a mind stream. So the sound produced by a bell or by the wind are produced by elements not invested with sensations. And then these two types of sounds produced by elements invested with sensations or not invested with sensations, can be addressed to beings, or they can not be addressed to beings. When they are addressed to beings, this means that when the sounds reach beings, the beings understand. When I pronounce the word vase, the sound vase reaches you and you understand. For example, if I say the word vase, the sound that I am producing is a sound produced by elements invested with sensations that is addressed to beings. In other words, you can understand this word. Or it is a sound that can be intended or addressed to beings. After we'll look at examples of each type of sound. So that was concerning the four aspects. Sounds produced by elements invested by sensations that are addressed to beings and that are not addressed to beings, and then sounds produced by elements not invested with sensations that are addressed to beings and that are not addressed to beings. And then it is said in the text that sound possesses 8 aspects. And the presentation of this 8 aspects, it's like a tree that develops. Khelzang Puntso said, first we have sounds produced by elements invested with sensation, and sounds produced by elements non-invested with sensation. And then each of these branches also branches. There are sounds produced by elements invested by sensation that are addressed to beings, and those not addressed. And likewise, those sounds produced by elements non-invested by sensations also branches into those that are addressed to beings and those that are not addressed to beings. And then, so you see, they branch, they progress, so now there's 4, and then there's another branch. And so each of these branches into pleasant and unpleasant. There are sounds produced by elements invested by sensations that are addressed to beings that are pleasant and that are unpleasant. And then there are sounds produced by elements invested by sensations that are not addressed to beings that are pleasant and unpleasant. And then likewise, sounds produced by elements non-invested with sensation that are addressed to beings, pleasant and unpleasant. And then we have sounds non-invested, not addressed to beings, pleasant and unpleasant. So 8 aspects. So then Khelzang Puntso gave a series of examples for each of these. For example, a sound produced by elements invested with sensations that is addressed to beings and that is pleasant. For example, Dharma teachings, obviously. Then, a sound produced by elements invested with sensations addressed to beings, but unpleasant, as accusations and insults. Very unpleasant. Then, a sound produced by elements invested with sensations that is not addressed to beings and that is pleasant. The example given is applause, clapping hands. We had some doubts about this, and we discussed the fact that when you're clapping, you can be clapping for someone. You're addressing it to the person who you're clapping for. But we didn't get an answer for that one. And that was my big question in study group. Then there are sounds produced by elements invested with sensations that is not addressed to beings and that is unpleasant. And here Khelzang Puntso gave the example of the sound produced by the contact between two bodies in a boxing match. Now we'll give examples for sounds produced by elements not invested with sensations. So first, sounds produced by elements not invested with sensations that is addressed to beings that is pleasant. This is the sound produced by the drum of the gods in the realm of the 33. The realm of the 33, you'll hear more about it in the presentation of the third chapter, the presentation of the world. In any case, in this realm of the 33, there is a drum. It's the drum of the gods, and it is intended for lazy, indolent individuals. And in order to motivate them, this drum rings out the 4 seals of the Dharma. All that is conditioned is impermanent. All that is associated with factors for descent is suffering. All phenomena are empty and free of suffering, devoid and empty of self. Nirvana is peace. So this is a sound produced by elements not invested with sensations that is addressed to beings that is pleasant. Then there is a sound produced by elements not invested with sensations that is addressed to beings that is unpleasant. This is, for example, in the northern continent of Zhuangmenyan. Likewise, we'll talk about this in the third chapter. In this continent, there is a tree, an unusual tree. When the death of one of the inhabitants of this continent is going to happen, the tree announces their death to them. The tree addresses itself to them, and a week before they die, the tree says to them, "You're going to die." So that's an example of sound produced by elements not invested with sensations, addressed to beings that is unpleasant. Then there is sound produced by elements not invested with sensations that is not addressed to beings and is pleasant. That's the sound of a bell. Of course, it has to be good quality metal because it could also potentially be unpleasant. Then there is a sound produced, the last one, a sound produced by elements not invested with sensations that is not addressed to beings and that is unpleasant. And the example given is the sound of a rock slide. So now we have looked at the 8 possible combinations, the 8 aspects of sound as they are presented in the Abhidharmakosha. Do you have questions? There are a couple minutes. Concerning the immediately preceding condition, you spoke about mental engagement, which is associated with mental consciousness. Is this the same as the omnipresent mental event called mental engagement? Probably something to be confirmed with those who study the Kedjuk. In Tibetan, it's Yila Jepa. Yes, it's the same. It was sort of the same question, but I connected with mental faculty. Isn't it mental faculty? Isn't the mental event mental engagement the mental faculty? What precedes? I was referring, I thought it was mental faculty, mental engagement, the mental event. We had the same question. In theory, yes, but we can't really develop much here because we haven't talked about mental faculty. I mean, you studied the Abhidharmakosha, you know about this idea of mental faculty, and we'll talk about it later, but at this point in the text, we haven't had any explanations on mental faculty, and what was explained here concerning this second condition is that it is this mental event, mental engagement, that is associated with mental consciousness. That's all we've got for the moment. But your remark is justified. One last question. I had a question concerning the definition of sound that you gave. It's a definition that's in the kosha, or it's given by Khelzang Puntso. What concerns me about this definition is that you said sound is what is perceived by auditory faculty, and then I was wondering, but isn't auditory faculty the definition like what perceives sound? So then isn't it cyclical? The definition of sound is that the ayatana of sound is the domain apprehended by auditory consciousness. That's the definition we received. And this definition is not written in the Abhidharmakosha. What we have concerning sound in the text composed by Vasubandhu is sound possesses 8 aspects. The definition that we have is what Khelzang Puntso gave to us. He used Karmapa's commentary, some other commentaries, commentary from the 6th Shamarpa, the 8th Karmapa, and the 9th Karmapa. Those are the commentaries he used. So all of the explanations that we give here are, of course, explanations that are relative to the Abhidharmakosha, but that come from commentaries written by masters who followed Vasubandhu. The Abhidharmakosha is versified, it's extremely succinct. So based on this versified text, many masters wrote commentaries. explaining, elucidating Vasubandhu's ideas. And concerning your question, I didn't quite understand what you meant in terms of things going around. It seems surprising to say that, it's just my perception, my ordinary perception, but it seems surprising to say that, to define sound by saying in this way, sound could also have another definition from a physical point of view. Yeah, sure. But we're really looking at things from the Vaibhashika point of view, and this is the definition that's given in relation to the Abhidharmakosha and the Vaibhashika view. This is the definition that's given. Of course, some scientists may have other definitions, and it's not necessarily in conflict, but depending on the lens we're looking at things through, the definitions will vary. And this is also where the word ayatana is really important. It's the sphere of sounds, not sound. And concerning the term ayatana, we will have explanations about what an ayatana is. We'll conclude here today. Thank you. Sanamdi tamche sepani domini pe tranam famchene kinkana chi balak tupai sipe sore troa